Okay. Hi, everyone. How are you? Good? Good? I don't know. I can't hear you. Yeah? Great? Okay. That's good. Okay. So congratulations. Today is your day. You're building your app. You're off and away. You're on your own. You know what you know, and you are the dev that decides where the users would go. As Pavla said before, I'm Britt Barak. Nice to meet you all. I'm based in Israel. I came today from London, though, from DroidCon London, so I'm still recovering from the flight, but I'm very, very happy and excited to be here. I work at the developer experience team or developer relations team at a company called Nexmo. Have you heard of them? Yeah? No? Okay. We have all kind of communication services and APIs and libraries for SMS, in-app messaging, calls, video calls, all this kind of stuff, and I'll show some example a little bit later. And I'm part of the Google Experts program for Android specifically. Maybe tell me a little bit about you. Are you developers? Who is here a developer? Good, for Android? Okay. Who have written an app? Ever? In his life? Okay. Who's been developing for like 3 years or more? Okay, cool. No, I just wanted to know. All right. We'll tweak this around and we'll talk a little bit about the system, about navigation in the system, what's going on under the hood, and what can you do to tweak the behavior of your application a little bit. And let's start basically and understand what I mean and what are we going to speak about. Well, basically when you start an app and you create an activity, and the activity is basically launched to the app world and to the ecosystem of the Android operating system. The first thing it does, it looks for a home, for some kind of a home, somewhere to be hosted and to feel nice and warm. And Android is very happy to provide it at home. This home is called a task. And this task has a name. Usually it's your package name, but we'll talk about it later a little bit more. So it has a home, and in this home it has some kind of a stack, so it's like a bed somewhere they can snuggle and lay down and rest. And this stack is usually called an activity stack, because this is where the activity lays down, or a back stack, because what it does is defines our back navigation. So the activity is there, sitting on the stack, but the more activities are welcome to join in. So as we launch more and more activities, just one would go on the top of the other, right? Because it's a stack. And when we click on the back button, as a stack, same thing that we expect would happen. So the first activity, or the last one actually, the first one that is on the top would go out of the stack, would pop up, and the next one, and the next one, until we don't have any more activities at the stack or at this task. And once this task is free of any activities, then the system is actually ready to get rid of it and to clear the memory from the system. And then what we're going to see is the last task that we had seen before. This task can be the app that we saw before, or it can be actually the launcher. So the desktop of the mobile, of the device, is a task as well. So this would be our default task to see. Okay, now that's great. Our lives are perfect with that behavior, right? We're all happy. Usually we are, but except when they're not, because sometimes we don't, and sometimes we do want to kind of tweak this thing around. Let's see why and how. So I told you before that I work currently on an SDK that it's still in development, but we have all kind of different communication services. I work in an SDK to stitch all of them together. So the SDK is still in developer preview, so I get to work with a lot of app developers and to figure out what are the best ways to integrate and what is the best way for the different applications to use and to behave with the services. So for examples, I have this kind of app that have all kind of conversations. So in a conversation, we would have text messages, in-app messaging, and calls and video calls and stuff like that. So our app would have this screen for all conversations, and then I click on one conversation. I have a conversation with Dave, for example. He's my designer. We're really good friends. So I have the conversation with him, and then I can actually start a phone call with him, or with me actually at this screenshot, or a video chat with me. As you can see, I talk with myself a lot. It's pretty nice. And this is the kind of app that will start and see what's the right way to tweak it. So the behavior can be tweaked in what we call flags, intent flags. That there are two ways that we can add them. One way is in the intent for when we start the activity, so we can just add them in the intent through the code, or in the Android manifest. We can just add it there. So we can do the same thing, we could get to the same behavior in both ways. What I'll do in this presentation, usually the intent flags that we use through code are more like granular. So sometimes for one line in the Android manifest, we would need one flag, but maybe more. So what I'll show in the slides is just how you use it on the Android manifest, but I do want you to know that you can do everything both ways. Okay, so the first thing, or the first launch mode, or the first behavior, the standard behavior, the default one, if we didn't do anything very specific or anything special, what happens in your app is every time that you start an activity, a new instance is created, right? Every time. That means that if I have this kind of task, for example, that I have the conversation list, as we saw before, and then I click on a conversation, then the conversation just starts a new instance, the conversation activity starts a new instance, goes in the task, and then if I start another conversation with another person, with the green person, with the pink person, then a new instance starts and added to the stack. If I start with the pink person, let's call him, what's your name? Camero? Camero? Yes? Good. So the pink person is Camero from now on. And let's, what? No, I'm not saying it right?
Yes, it's Camille.
Camille?
Yes, Camille.
Ah, Camille. Can't hear anything. So if I start a conversation with Camille, and now I click on another button and I start another instance of a conversation with him, what's going to happen is I'll have another activity, another instance of the same activity with a conversation with Camille, one on top of the other. Do we like this situation? Necessarily? Maybe yes, but maybe not so much. Why? What can be troublesome? Right, when we click on the back button, we have to click a lot more times in order to get back to the conversation list, right? Another thing that we might not like about it is, well, this is activities, so they have UI. So maybe, for example, I have the conversation with Camille, and then I started typing, so the UI changes, but I didn't save it because I didn't send the message, or I edited something, but I didn't save it yet. But then I have the other conversation activity on top, so the UI state is different now, right? So it's not always the right situation for us. So what I can do, and we usually do, is to change the launch mode to what we call single top. And that means that if the recent activity is the same one that we're about to launch, then don't create a new instance. Just use the same one with a different data, or just edit the data. What do I mean? That if I have now the conversation with Camille, and now I want to start another conversation with, what's your name? Daniel, that's easy. So now I want to start joking. Now I want to start another conversation with Camille. Then the thing that's going to happen is that we're going to take a look at the stack and see, okay, I already have this conversation activity, so I don't want to create a new one because this is the top of my task. This is the recent one. I don't want to create another one. What I'm going to do is to send the info, to send the data in the on new intent, to send it into the conversation activity that we already have with Camille, and then I or we, the developers, can just switch the data and switch the UI, and everything's good. And now if I start a phone call, for example, with Daniel, then it's a different activity. It's all good. So I can just push it in the task. It's all good. And now if I want to start a conversation, for example, it is in the task, right? It's true. It's in the stack, but it's not on the top. And since it's not on the top, I can just push it on the task, and we're all happy. So this is kind of the single top behavior. It's very common for cases, for example, when we create search. In your app, maybe you have some search, and then what you can do is basically have the search activity as a single top. And then, like, when you start to type something for the search, you can just call the search activity again and to give it the new search term or the new data. And so I started searching for thanks, and now I search for hi. So just the data would go in the on new intent, and we can switch the data. It's good for us, as we said before, because now if I click back, I don't need to see all my previous searches, right? I don't need to see them, and just I forget about the search, and I go to the conversation list or whatever. So that's awesome, and that's pretty useful. We use it quite a lot, this launch mode. But what happens if I actually want one instance of the activity in the system, in the task? Because up until now, if it wasn't on the top, I could have created more and more instances of the same activity. And maybe it's not the thing that we need. For example, if I have a phone call, in the system, in the Android system, in your device, probably you would only want one instance of a phone call activity, right? It makes sense. We cannot, with one device, we cannot create more than that. So we somehow need to have a situation where I can just have one instance of this phone call activity. So in order to do that, I have one more launch mode that I can use, and it is called single task. What does that mean, or how does that work? If I have a task with a conversation list, as we saw before, and we have an eye just below because this is what's visible for me, for the user. So I have the conversation list as we had before, and I click on a conversation, and there's a conversation that I started with Daniel. It's there, and now I create a phone call with him, and the phone call is a single task. Now, the single task is very, very spoiled. So the phone call activity says, okay, I'm a single task. I don't want to be with the task with all you peasants. I'll create a new task. So it creates a new task, and it goes there on the stack in the other task. It's the same application, but still it's a different task. And now if I want to create, now this is, because this is the recent activity or the recent task, now this becomes the task that is visible for us, the users. And now, if now I want to create another activity for a conversation, the conversation is not a single task. So the conversation, now it's with Camille, it's fine. I just add it to the task that is currently visible for me. We add it on top. And now, basically, we're all good. If I want to create another phone call conversation with Camille, and the phone call, as we said, is a single task, the thing that's going to happen is we said we just want one of those in the system. So the system looks for the same basically activity in the system. It finds it, right, because we already have one. So it finds it, and what it's going to do, it's going to remove everything that is on top of it. So it's going to remove the conversation activity that I had with Camille, and then now we have the situation where this the same activity is on top, and now what we can do is just to switch the data. So now the on activity, the on intent, the on new intent would be called, and now we can grab the data and just switch them. So now we got the situation when we have just one phone call instance at a time. So that's good, and what's going to happen is when we click the back button, the task that is visible for us would be cleared, so the phone call activity would be cleared, and there are no more tasks, no more activity in the green task, so we go back to the blue task, which is the task that was visible for us before. It's not because this is the task that we called, because this was what was visible for us before. And now we can click on the back and just remove everything. Now, if you noticed, what happened, we had a situation here where from the phone call with Camille, I got to the conversation with Daniel, which is a little bit weird, right? Because it's a different context. And I'm not sure this is what we want to do, and this is the behavior that we meant for our app to do. This is not actually what we meant to happen. So what we can do, there's another option. The last option that I do want to mention is a single instance launch mode. And the single instance launch mode, it's pretty much the same. It's a little bit different in one nuance. And what it's going to do for us is that. So I have a task, and same as before, I have the conversation list, and from the conversation list, I click on a conversation, I start a conversation with Daniel. Start the conversation with Daniel, and then I create a phone call with him. Once again, it's very spoiled, the phone call activity, so the phone call activity would open a new task, would go in a new task on the new stack, which will now be visible for us. And now, when I start a new conversation, the phone call is now a single instance. Single instance means I created a new task, but I'm also the only activity that is allowed to be in the task. I'm the queen of this task. So when a new activity, the conversation, wants to join, phone call does not allow that, and it sends it, okay, you're not gonna join me, look somewhere else. Look for a different task that would accept you. So the system basically looks for a different task to host it, and for different reasons, the last task that we had is actually a good fit, so we can push it there. We can push the conversation activity there, and now this is the task that is being visible for us, right, because we made the changes, the recent changes. And basically, this is how we fix it. This is how we fix the situation. Now, if I create another phone call, as we said, very spoiled. So it looks for a task that fits the phone call activity, which is single instance. It has to be in a different task. And now, since it only allows one instance in the system, what we're going to do is to get it on new intent and to switch the data instead of creating a new instance. Okay, that's good. So far, these are the launch modes that we can use. A very, very important thing, though, is every time we do this kind of stuff and we create the task that I showed you before, the blue and the green and all of those, it's awesome to look at it like that, but it's under the hood, right? It's behind the scenes. And what we as developers have to assure is that these tasks are reachable for our users, because we don't want to have situations where we started edit, for example, the conversation and or to create the phone call and then go to a different task, and then we don't have any way to get back to the conversation and to the data that we already provided there. So we have to make sure that our tasks are always reachable. How or what are the ways for tasks to make sure that the tasks are reachable? Let's see. So once again, I want to show one scenario to make it more clear that how can we lose a touch with a task. So for example, if I have an app with first task, and now I go and create a new task in any way that we showed before. So I create a new task, and now, for example, I click on the home button. And if I click on the home button, we're going to go to the desktop. As I told you before, the desktop is another task. It's not an app that we wrote. It's something of the system, but it's a task, so it behaves the same. So I'm on the desktop with my own task, and then I want to go back to the app. So what I can do is basically click on the launcher icon, right? I click on the launcher icon, and it just opens the app, right, with the task that we defined as a default, as the launcher task. So it goes back to the blue task, but if I click back, what am I going to see? Which one? Yeah, I'm going to see the desktop. Why am I going to see the desktop? Because it was the last one that was visible for us, was the last one that we interacted with. So how do I get back to this green task at all? Do you have ideas? I can't, actually. I cannot get back to it, pretty much, because I didn't set it up. So what are the ways for us to make this task reachable? The first thing is, obviously, to have a task that is attached for the activity that is on the launcher, right? That's the most trivial thing. And for these activities and these tasks, we don't actually need to worry about, because they would always be reachable from the desktop. But another way, or another thing, if we want to create tasks from within the activity, from within an activity or within the application, we can use an affinity. What is the task affinity? The task affinity is basically the name of the task. That, as I told you before, the default name, and if you've never did any changes, the name is going to be just your package name. And usually it's completely okay. If you don't open new tasks, it's completely fine. And I don't think you would ever care about it if you didn't have the chance to work with the tasks. So it looks like that. This is your package name. But if you don't like that, or if for some reason you need to ask for a task to be on a specific, on a different name, or you want to ask an activity to be on a specific task, what you need to do is to say, okay, now you belong to another name, to another affinity. And the way to do it is just to add this line when you create the activity, when you declare the activity on your manifest, you just say, okay, this is the task affinity. It would work only if we use the single task or single instance launch mode that I showed you before. So only if we create a new task, then the system would actually do something with this task affinity. Because if we did not declare any launch mode like that, it does not care, and it just do whatever makes sense for it, and would just add the activity to the task that we're engaging with. So it would only do that. All right, so this was another way to just change the affinity, and then we're all good. And then basically what's going to happen is that you're going to see the task on the recents on the recents view that we'll see in a second. But another way that is sometimes just a shortcut for this affinity management is what we call document. So a document basically means that this activity is something that can be independent from other activities in the app. What do I mean? For example, if I have a phone call activity and I want us to be able to reach the phone call activity from the recent screens and maybe to launch it from any other app, right? Not specifically for my app. Maybe I have another app that creates phone calls, right? And I want for the phone calls to use my app just for the phone call activity, for the phone call service. So what I want them to do is basically to be able to always go into the recent screen and then see the activity, the phone call activity, there as a recent task, right? It's still my activity, or the same activity, but it's a different it's the same application. It's my application, but a different activity that I want to be able to reach from the recents. And just using a document, this is what it means, basically to be able to do that. So how do we decide usually what makes sense to be a document and what not? If you think about the screens or the activities or the services in your application, and it makes sense for the users to sometimes want to use it when the screen is split, or, well, sometimes we have a multi-window in our own mobile devices, but sometimes if you're developing for Chromebooks and stuff like that, for picture-in-picture modes, for Android TV, all this kind of stuff, then you actually always have to think about this kind of stuff. Does that make sense for this activity to be separate? And if the answer is yes, what you can do is just declare a document launch mode, and then the app knows that to look at this activity as a separate document. There are different launch modes. If you don't define anything, it means just none. Or we can ask to put it into an existing document, and then it just switches the data in on intent, as we saw before, so it's pretty much the same, and it's pretty useful for many situations. One more small thing is basically how can you see it? How can you see the stack, the tasks that you currently have, which tasks are open, which activities are on a stack? All that you need to do is just to look on the dumpsys. So you do ADB shell dumpsys. If you've ever done that, it gives you so much information that it's very, very easy to get lost. So what you can do if you're only interested in that bit, to ask for activities, and then it gives you the activity stack. And I wanted to do a screenshot here, but I didn't want you to be scared. So I skipped the slide. Basically, it gives you all of the stacks and all of the tasks and all of the stacks, and just give you the launch mode and the location of the activity and how it's presented on the screen and all this kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool. All right, what I do want you to think about is now we discussed a little bit more for the example what happens with my own app. So if I have many activities, and how do I navigate in my own app? But sometimes and many times we interact with many other applications, right? And sometimes other applications can open my activities. And more often this is where this tweaking and launch mode would be very much affecting our users' experience. Okay, so basically now we're done and everything is good. We love activities. We always use just activities, right? Yes, except when we don't, because sometimes we want, and sometimes we also use fragments. So a few words really about what's happening with fragments. So fragments are always, as you know, attached to activities. They're not just separate components. They always have to have an activities that they're attached to. And what's going to happen for them, they will just be added to the stack in just the same way that you expect. So per activity, we have a fragment 1, then fragment 2, and then when we click the back button, we would just pop up every one of them, just one after the other, until there's no activities, and as before, we can get rid of the tasks. Now, actually, many times, we have more fragments than activities, whether if we like it or not, and if we like fragments or not, and it's a whole different conversation. But many times if we use the standard Android navigation patterns, like the drawer, and this is part of our business app, which is quite complex, and I took a look at it, and as you can see, it's just the standard navigation, right? The view pager, tab layout, button navigation, a drawer, all of this kind of stuff, and then, well, yeah, all of this are basically fragments. So not a lot of activities, many fragments. And maybe your app does that as well. And since Google last year, so last I/O, decided to share with us some best practices about Android development in general, and the pattern that they announced that it's like the best practice is use one activity as and many fragments. Therefore, one of the things that they released, the components that they released with Jetpack, which is many other services to help us with Android development, is the navigation component. And it is decided that it would be focused on fragment with this pattern, single activity and many fragments, as they believe that we should work. And once again, many times and often we have to if we don't want to write all these custom things ourselves. We don't have a lot of time, but I do just want to overview a little bit of this component in order for you just to see how cool and nice it is and maybe to start exploring it yourself. So basically what we can do from now on is to create a navigation XML with a navigation tab. And this navigation tab would define the navigation graph. So it's a graph for our app. And from which fragment we would go to the next one, and so on, and how, and with which animations, and it's pretty cool. Now, once you have this tag on your app, on an XML, there's also an editor that can make this thing visible. So it's like in the layout when we have some kind of a layout tag, a layout file, and we have an editor for that. So now we have an editor for navigation. And the way it looks like is something like this. And what we can do is on the center part to choose the destinations. So to choose the fragment or the activities or custom destinations, but I don't want to dive into that. We choose all the destinations and basically put them here. So for example, in our app, as I showed you before, we have the conversation list, and then we have a conversation activity and phone call activity and video call activity. So all of this. Now, if there are fragments, I can use them with this, with the navigation bar, with the navigation graph. So I add all of those. I add all of the destinations, so the fragments that make sense to put together in one graph. And I can give each one of them IDs. It's the same way as if you would give your views IDs. It's just in order to be able to relate to them and to call them from within the graph and also from the code. So it's only for your own use, this ID part. And after we do that, oh, and one of them has to be set as the start destination. So this is where we start. One fragment has to be the start. For us, probably it would be the conversation list. And now what we need to do is just to build the flow. So we have like nodes, right, in the graph. We have nodes which are the destination, and now we need to, to have the edges. So to create an actual graph, to build the flow, from which fragment, from which destination we can go to a different one. And the way to do it is either to set an action with the editor, or just you can just create like a link between them, like physically, just link one destination to the other. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty convenient. So for example, from the conversation list, I can go to a conversation. It makes a lot of sense. So this line is called an action, and after I create actions with all of the different destinations, we have the graph that we can use. And then I need to host the graph somewhere. What does it mean to host the graph? We have like the logic. Which destinations go to the other one? We have the logic and the rules, but it needs to be, visible somewhere. So we need to create a space, a container, that means, okay, all the fragments that goes in and out would be here. This is where you'll see them, in the layout, actually. So in the layout activity, we have somewhere that we dedicate for a navigation host. A nav host is an interface. Basically, you have an implementation yourself, but there's a nav host fragment that is a specific implementation that comes with a component, so with a library. And what we need to do in our fragment, we create, in a fragment layout, or the activity, we create a fragment tag, and the fragment tag is actually for the nav host fragment. So this is the name, the nav host fragment. We actually import that fragment and give it the navigation graph XML that we created before. We say, okay, take this is the graph, this is the logic, this is what defines which fragment should go to the next one. Okay. All that we need to do now, there are a bunch of stuff that we need to do. If you want to actually set it up to use the app button as well, so you need to add just this few lines to do that. So you say, okay, find the navigation controller for this fragment or for this activity, and when the user click up, just do the navigate app that this navigation host, the navigation graph actually defines. So this is what you can do. How you can find the navigation host from your code. There are a few ways to do it, but basically all of them are extremely easy. So it means just you can get to it from either a view or an activity or a fragment, and you can get a reference to it. And then whenever you need to and whenever you want to navigate to a different fragment, a different destination, to now from a conversation list open a conversation, what you just need to do is to grab the navigation controller and to do navigate to this destination. So it's pretty nice in this graph and the actions. You can define already there in the XML all sorts of things. So for example, the arguments that you pass. So for example, the conversation ID that I want to pass, I can just put it there. I can also add there I don't have the time, so I skipped all the slides for the animations that you can define there very easily in the XML and all this kind of stuff. It's pretty easy and it's pretty cool. And basically, this is it. So there are tons of stuff to think about navigation and all of this stuff. And it's kind of complicated, maybe sometimes if you start diving into it. But will you succeed? Oh yes, you will indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. Still dev, you'll move fragments. I believe in you all, even though we talked about so many stuff. Unfortunately, or thankfully, this is all I have for you today and this time. I really thank you so much for listening and participating. I'll be here for any questions, but feel free to talk to me today or later on through Twitter or wherever possible. Would love to keep in touch with you all. So thank you and have fun today.